Hey guys, long time no see. I haven't been sitting in this chair for a while, but I am back today with a second video tailing off of the swatches video for these palettes. These are the Sephora Mega Mix palettes and the Mini Mix palettes. I have all of them. So I did already swatch all of these. If this is the first video you're finding, I'll link that one so you can check that one out if you're interested. But in this one, I wanted to kind of show you kind of the different formulas that are inside these palettes and how they look on the eye, like how easy they are to work with, pigmentation level, fallout, like all that kind of stuff. I'm not trying to be creative or like make the most beautiful eye looks in this video. If they come out good, that's like fantastic, great look, but it's just mainly to see how they are performing and show you that. Let me start off with this palette. This is the Fearless Cool Nudes palette. There you can get an idea of kind of where the shades are. They are cool nudes. They're kind of like light taupes and silvers. So this palette has a couple of different textures going on. It has this one, which is a matte, but it's a creamy matte. It's like a cream powder hybrid. And on me, I've tried this one and it sits kind of heavy on my lids. I will show you that. And then the other two mattes are, they're powder mattes, true powders. They're not creamy, they're just normal mattes. There are some like sparkly shimmers, and I believe that is this one, this one, this one, this one are sparkly shimmers. This one is like a glitter, and this one is like a matte base with a lot of sparkle in it. So it's kind of like a sparkly shimmer, but it has much more matte in it than the other shimmers do. Okay, I'm gonna start out with this shade, this creamy matte, and I'm gonna use just a regular fluffy brush to pick some up. So that shade's pretty light. It's pretty pale on me. It is not deep enough to be like a transition shade on me, but it does kind of even out the skin tone. And I'm going to take that down on the lid a little bit too. So there's what that one looks like. I have the ABH eye primer on under this. That one's a pretty like moisturizing and lightweight primer. And then I'm going to do this shade. This is just a little bit lighter, or just a little bit darker, I mean. That one has a little bit of kick up, but it's not too bad. So that's just adding a little bit of depth, and it's applying pretty nice over that creamier shade. I feel like the pigment is pretty good. It's not like super crazy pigmented, but it's definitely plenty of pigment that it's not hard to build it up or get it to show up. I think I'm going to use this deeper one as like a liner, or just to like smudge it in my lash line. Okay, I feel like that had plenty of pigment. It was pretty easy to get it to show up. I didn't feel like I had to layer it so much to get it to show up. There's a little bit of fallout, just a tiny little bit of those little black specks. It's not bad at all. And I'm a little bit tempted to use that deeper brown up in the crease a little bit more and see how that works for me. I'm going to pick up a little bit on this little fluffy brush, and I'm just going to tap off the excess so I don't have so much color on the bristles. I feel like that's helping. Seems decent. It's very cool toned. Even this deep brown shade is still very cool toned. Okay, this bottom shade is a sparkly shimmer. Yeah, mixture, it's got a mixture of fine shimmer. I don't know if you're able to see that. It's got a mixture of fine shimmer and larger sparkle. This is an older brush that I'm using. It is no longer, I don't believe you can get it anymore. I am trying to find a replacement too, but I haven't found one yet. It's a Sigma E56. It's just kind of like a smaller version of a concealer brush. It's a synthetic brush and it's flat and firm, so I'm able to really press the shade into the lid, which I like for shimmers. I don't have it here, but a very cheap alternative that's not really the same and not quite as good is one from, what is the brand? Wet n Wild. It's those pink brushes. They have a small like concealer type brush, and that one works okay. It's almost like this one, but I do like this one better. So there's what that one looks like. It's very sparkly, and I got like moderate fallout from that. It could definitely be worse. I've had much worse fallout. And it's not sticking horribly. It's kind of brushing away pretty easily. I think before I finish cleaning that up, I want to try using my fingertip and see the difference that might make. Yeah, it does. It helps a little bit. Sometimes I get worse fallout with my fingertip than with a brush, and sometimes it's the other way where I get worse fallout with a brush. This one seems similar in the level of fallout, either with a brush or my fingertip. So I'm gonna go in with this shade. This one is a shimmer, but it has less sparkle in it than the other shimmers in this palette. It's a little bit more of a smooth sheen, at least when swatched. So I wanna see how that looks on the eye. So far, these two shimmers are they're not dry, airy shimmers. They have some like creamy emollient kind of feel to it when I touch them with my fingers. And they don't tend to fly up in the air or create a ton of powder kick up. They do pick up fairly easy on a brush. So this eyeshadow is transferring easily. I'm not having to spend loads of time building it up. And it is a little less sparkly. It does have some dimension. It's not like a smooth metallic kind of shimmer, but it does have like much finer sparkle in it. And a little bit of fallout, but not nearly as much as that first shimmer. So now I'm going to use this shade. This is a glitter. If I remember correctly, it's kind of a flaky, kind of chunky deal. Okay, it's not going everywhere. It's kind of staying where I'm putting it, luckily. All right, I'm starting to get a little bit more fallout now under that inner corner. But I don't really want to wet the brush. I think I'm going to switch to a smaller brush. This is a Morphe V203. And then I'll just clean it up afterwards. Because I want it to kind of have that piecey, chunky look. I don't want it to get too metallic. And then I'm going to grab that clean Morphe liner brush, and I'm going to get this area near the tear duct with it. It's kind of tricky to get this placed just right. Actually, before I finish cleaning that up. So that's what that fallout looks like. That's kind of verging on annoying for me, but with that texture, like there's really not, I don't know what else I would really do besides wetting the brush, and that's gonna change the way the shadow looks on the skin, and I don't want to do that. So I'm just gonna put up with it and clean it. Let me start with the deeper shade on this eye, since I went in the opposite order. With this first look, I went lightest to deepest with the matte shades, and that's often how I do my eyeshadow. But every once in a while, depending on the formula, I might start with the deep shade first and then work the other way where I start adding the lighter shades afterwards. So I did not pick that shade up very heavily. I feel like it has a good amount of pigment. It's not crazy overly pigmented, so that's, in my opinion, that's good because that can be pretty tricky to work with. But it's also not like sheer. I mean, it has plenty of color payoff. And I feel like it's going on pretty evenly. I'm not being like the most careful with how I'm applying it, but it's going on pretty well. And it's blending pretty well too. I almost never can get like a perfect application and blend with just one brush this way and this deep of a shade. I often have to use several brushes to get just the right placement and blending, because I have this like deep crease here that's just hard to reach, and the color never goes on perfectly just with one brush. And that's good enough. I'm gonna move on to some of the lighter shades, and then I might come back to this dark shade to like even out the lid part. And I'm going into this lighter powder shade. I'm not tapping the excess on the back of my hand. I am trying to get like kick up off of my brush, but I'm not gonna try to shear out the color on the bristles. Okay, so that blended out pretty easy. I feel like that shade is kind of sheer, which is a good thing if you're gonna use it this way. If you wanna just use it as a blending shade, it's easier to get a smooth blend when it's sheer, but it might frustrate you if you don't wanna spend the time building it up. I'm just gonna use a like light layer just here to make a gradient, and then I'm gonna go back into that deeper shade to add depth instead of trying to use this one to build up depth. Oh my god, my desk layout is driving me nuts. If I keep ducking under the camera, it's because my brushes are behind my mirror. It's awkward. Anyway, I have another small pencil brush I'm going to use with this deep shade. Okay, that's pretty good. I think it looks nice. I don't think it was hard to get to this point with these shadows. So I'm going to use this shimmer. This is like a pale gold. So I'm going to try to keep this one just on this part of the lid. Getting quite a bit of fallout already. I like how that's a little bit of a warmer, shimmery sparkle. It's a nice contrast to the mattes, the cooler mattes. I think I'm going to add some setting spray to my brush. This is what I'm using. This is actually the Trader Joe's Rose Toner inside of an old Urban Decay all-nighter setting spray. So I feel like this shade applies pretty well when I use it with a dampened brush. It doesn't start looking too thick or anything. It keeps that sparkly look. I'm a little bit torn on how to apply this shade. This is the Sparkly Black. I normally don't like to use these types of shades at all. I could use my fingertip, but then I won't be able to blend the edges, which is why if I am going to use it, I'm going to use a matte shade underneath that will help create a blend before I even go in with that shade. So that's why I'm going to try to apply this one like over this brown, and hopefully that comes out okay. Okay, that looks pretty good actually. I'm just using an angled brush to close that gap at my lash line. And I'm going to use a pencil brush to help with a little bit of that blending in the crease. So I picked up a little of that black, and I'm going to kind of buff it out on the back of my hand so there's only a little bit of color on the bristles, just to help kind of diffuse this. It's actually pretty well diffused even without doing this. If you're not really that concerned, you could probably just leave it. So it's a little bit hard to tell how much of the fallout under my eye is from the black and how much is from the pale gold. I think I'm pretty sure I got fallout from both. But there's definitely more fallout here on the inner part where I use that gold than there is on the outer part. So I don't think I actually got that much fallout applying it that way with my fingertip. The only thing I haven't showed you yet in this palette is the silver, so I will probably just use that on the lower lash line, and then you will have seen most of the textures in this collection, as well as every shade in this particular palette. There are a few other textures in this collection that are not in this palette. So there are mattes with ultra fine sparkle. That was not in this palette. There are like true glitters. The shimmer that I used on the inner corner of this look is glittery, but it's not like a true glitter. It's just like a really flaky shimmer. But there are true glitters in this collection. Pretty sure I'm gonna get fallout with this, and I really don't want to deal with it, so I'm gonna spray my brush before I even go in with it with that same spray. There was a time when I didn't have any silvers like this, and I now have quite a few silvers that are this color. This one's a little different in that it's mostly fine sparkle. If I apply it heavily enough, it looks like I could get a metallic look out of it, but it's mostly sparkle. Some of the other silvers that I have are more like almost like a liquid metal foiled kind of look. So the color is similar, but the texture is different. That's a fun color. It's not one I felt drawn to, but I used it because I wanted to show you what it looks like. But I am more pleased with it now that it's actually on the eye. Or like more excited about it, I guess is a better way to put it. And it's a little sheer, like not in a bad way. I think it's kind of a nice effect. But if you don't want to see the color underneath it, or you don't want to see too much of your skin underneath it, that's just the type of shade that this is. It's not opaque. Okay, and I'm still getting fallout. I'm not spraying my brush every single time, but I am trying to keep the bristles kind of damp. But I'm still getting some fallout regardless of that. a lot of the palettes, I've tried most of them, except the minis. I haven't used as many of the minis. I think I've used most of the larger palettes at this point, and most of them have the same kind of formulas. Like most of the mattes tend to be like this. Most of the shimmers tend to be like the ones I use today. Except for what I did mention earlier, that there are some textures that aren't in this palette, so I will have to use maybe one or two other palettes to kind of show you what those look like. And then I think the plan is to just insert some photos of looks I have done instead of going through this whole process, because it's already a long video and I don't want it to be that long, so I'll try to speed it up that way for you. Okay, so I'm back and I'm gonna do some looks with the mini palettes. I have two mini palettes and I have a look in mind, and I don't think I've used either of these yet, but I want to combine them. This is Boss Berry and Peach Power that I have. In Peach Power, I have that one texture where it's a matte with little fine sparkles in it. This is different than the black matte with sparkles. The sparkles in this are much smaller and finer and more dispersed, so there's a lot more matte visible in this shade. And then I also have in this palette a True Glitter, and then Boss Berry is just a normal powder matte, a standard shimmer, and then this one is a sparkling shimmer, but it has like a strong visible matte base to it and like a high shine shimmer. And I'm going to start off with this pale matte peach. This one is noticeably powdery in the pan. There's some powder kick up, maybe a little bit more than would be nice. That's just a very light, lightly visible peach. It's very pale. Okay, now I'm gonna go into this slightly darker orangey peach shade. This one has sparkles. This is a little bit powdery. It's actually not quite as powdery as that paler shade next to it. I don't know why did they put sparkles in this? I'm not even getting a lot of fallout from it. It's just, I don't see the purpose other than it looks pretty in the pan. Okay, and then I'm gonna tap on a little bit with my fingertip right at the very end here. I'm getting a little bit of that sparkle to stick. I mean, I see it a little bit. It is pretty. It's just ultra subtle. And there's just a few little specks of fallout. And I'm gonna unfortunately disturb that peach shade. I'm gonna use this kind of berry tone shade somehow also in the outer corner from this palette. This is just a matte, no sparkles in it. What I could have done, instead of the order that I applied it in, is I could have applied this one first and then went in with that deeper peach. Yeah, it's kind of what I'm doing here is dusting away the deeper peach that I have on the outer lid. It's definitely thinning it out. So in hindsight, I would probably start with this shade before I apply anything at all, and then maybe use the pale peach as a transition and then go in with the deeper peach. And also a primer. I think in all that I have tested these shadows, I think I remember primer helping a lot with these mattes to help them kind of stay put and not be easily moved if I'm blending over them or trying to apply layers of product. So now that I've done that, I'm going to go and add one more little tap of that deeper peach that I kind of dusted away a little bit. Now I'm going to use this shade on the inner lid. I'm going to start off with an eyeliner brush to do that, my Sigma EO5. It's a little small of a brush, but I want to kind of be a little bit more precise with this. So this one has a little bit of sparkle. It is visible. It's a nicely dimensional shimmer, but it also has fine shimmer in it. A few specks fall out, but nothing too bad. And then I want to use this blue. I have a feeling the base color in this is going to be a little bit too dark for what I'm going to do with it. Okay, so this is a very small brush, and I just want to put a little bit here on the very center of my lid. I don't want to cover up the peach. I just want it to be like a little bit of an accent. It's a little bit dark, but it also has a lot of shine. This is probably not the best way to apply it to show you this shade. I may have to use it again in some other way. And I'm just gonna use this on the entire lower lash line, so that way you can get a better idea of what that base color looks like. That definitely shows it much better, and it does have fallout, like moderate fallout. I think I'm seeing both sparkle and pigment fallout from it. Not too much pigment, mostly sparkle. I just have one shade that I haven't used yet, and that's the glitter. I'm gonna put it on the inner corner. Oh, it's a lot, and it's not that easy to clean off. Okay, I'm just gonna leave it. It's, you know, if I use this again, I will probably use it with a wet brush. Probably the majority of the shimmers in this collection, I would recommend using a wet brush if you want to just not deal with fallout or have much less of it to deal with. All right, I'm using a Morphe E36 small pencil brush, and I'm going to pick up some glitter with that. I might switch brushes. I might move to something like a flat brush or something. I don't know how well this is going to work. I like the color of this. It's kind of like a soft peachy orange with a subtle greenish kind of shift to it. Some of those specks went somewhere else where I didn't want them to go. So I'm going to try to brush them away. This is actually easier to clean than the sparkles are, because there's fewer pieces and they're easier to kind of unstick from the skin. This is a Morphe eyeliner brush. I just want to be able to apply this a little bit more precisely. It's a Morphe M443. I'm not a big glitter person, but I do appreciate having a few of them in unique colors. It definitely makes it fun, and it's, to me, a little bit less annoying than sparkle is for some reason. Okay, there is look number one for the second set of looks. It didn't come out the best. It's kind of a weird placement and choice of colors for where I put them, and order of the way that I applied them also. But I do like the combo of colors. I might try something different another time. They're pretty, they applied fine. I think, I don't know. Yeah, there's a little bit of powderiness. There's some fallout from the more obvious shimmers. There's some sparkle fallout from this matte with sparkle. The glitter doesn't have a whole ton of fallout. It mostly stays where I put it, but some of it did kind of like move as I was adjusting and I had to kind of brush them away. This little trio is really fun. I think I might like this little trio better than the peach one. Would be fun just to wear by itself. I do want to point out, somebody in the comments asked me about this shade and whether it is similar to a Natasha Denona shade that is in the bronze palette. I tried to describe that shade as best I could, but nothing is going to describe like a visual will describe. So here is the bronze palette, and the shade that was questioned was the shade Rhodium here. This is like a deep shade with a slight bluish sheen, and they were asking if this shade is similar to this one in the Bossberry palette. They are not that similar. They both have a base color and a shimmer. The base color is kind of similar, but the sheen is very different. So that's what they look like together. This one is like a duochrome actually, and this one is not. It's like a satin and it's a one-dimensional color. So here's the two side by side swatched. On the bottom here I have the Natasha Denona shade called Rhodium, and the one above is the one from the Bossberry palette. So they have a similar base color. The Sephora one's a little bit more red, and the sheen is much stronger and more sparkly in the Sephora shade. For this look, I want to use these two palettes. This one is the Rebellious Rosy Nudes palette, and this one is the Ethereal Lilac palette. I am also going to use this palette from Danessa Myricks. This is the Groundwork Defining Neutrals palette, and I want to use maybe one or two of the creamy shades as like a tacky base to help with some of the shimmer in the Sephora palettes. Okay, I'm going to use this shade called Chiseled. I'm just going to start that out over most of the lid and the crease. Okay, I'm going to go in a little bit deeper with this shade called Harvest. I'm going to go with this deep brown. I have used that one before and it was kind of hard to build up. It took a while, but I haven't tried it this way where I applied a creamy base first. Yeah, so for how deep this looks in the palette, it actually goes on kind of sheer. I do like how it's adhering over these creamy shades. Okay, and then I'm going to use this shade. This has little fine sparkles. It's a powder matte with fine sparkles, and out of all of this texture that in this collection, this shade has probably the least amount of sparkles. They barely show. So it's showing a little bit, but I want it to be a little bit more noticeable as the shade that it is. I am putting it over some brown, so it's kind of muting it out. But I just applied a thin layer with a fluffy brush. I'm going to go in with an angled brush more precisely and hope that does better to kind of increase the intensity. And then I'm going to add some more of the deep brown here. And I'm going to use a little bit of this mauvey, kind of light mauvey shade on the inner crease. I'm kind of craving for this shade to be a little bit more brighter, a little bit brighter than it is, but I didn't really apply it the best way to make that happen. It's also just kind of a muted shade. A lot of the colors in this collection are kind of muted. I'm gonna use this shade. This is like a normal shimmer. I don't think it has much, if any, sparkle in it. Yeah, it's a softer kind of shimmer. It's like a standard shimmer, maybe even close to a satin finish. But I really like that. It's got a decent amount of shine, but it shows up well and it applies well. And it's not messy. And the tone is really nice too. I think I'm gonna use from the Ethereal Lilac, the one kind of greenish shade. I'm gonna use that on the lid. So this one looks like it has a similar sheen as the shade that I used on this eye, but this one does not have a dark base color. It's more blue than this one, and it's sheerer, but it has a lot of sparkle and a lot of reflect, so it does show up well. This shade is a duochrome. It is purple at one angle and more of a blue-green at another angle. That's definitely some fallout. I think I'm going to try that with a wet brush. Alright, I really packed that on, so I got a lot of mess to clean up. I feel like it's kind of, the sparkles are dusting away a little bit. Let's see, I need to be kind of careful with that. I'm gonna add a little bit more and hopefully it sticks better. So, with that in mind, these also may adhere better over a tacky primer. If you have some, like a glitter glue or something, or just directly over a cream shadow, they'll probably stick a little bit better. Look at that fallout. I kind of want to use that berry shade that I used originally on the lower lash line, mostly by itself. I want it to show up a little bit better, and then I want to combine it with the lavender topper shade from this palette. Okay, so this glitter is different than the other one that I showed you. This is super, super chunky. This one has normal glitter, like the type that look like octagon shapes, but also it has flakes of larger pieces that are more of an irregular shape, and it's kind of a multicolor glitter. It has purple and looks like blue and gold. I kind of like how the color of the purple glitter over that pink is kind of changing like what that base color looks like almost. So I'm choosing to use this glitter this way. If you don't feel comfortable, don't feel safe doing this, don't do it. I've never had any major problems with glitter personally, but I know some people have. So just use your own judgment for what feels safe for you. There is some fallout. It does adhere by itself. I feel like this flakier glitter doesn't adhere quite as well as the glitter in the peach palette. For some reason that other one it sticks to the skin a little bit better. And I also did apply it over a powder shadow, but I did the same in that other video, or that other look. But still, I feel like this one doesn't stick quite as easily. I have to use a little bit more pressure. And I still get some flakes here. When I go to remove this glitter, because of where I have it, I'm planning to use like a piece of Scotch tape to kind of like stick to that glitter and lift off as much as I can before I go in with a makeup remover, so I have less risk of like accidentally rubbing those particles into my eye. I feel like I have a little bit less of an issue with that kind of thing happening if I keep the glitter on the lower lash line or the inner corner. For some reason, if I put it on the upper lid, I feel like it tends to want to get into my eyes a little bit more. So I don't often use glitter that way. Ooh, okay, so here's where we are with this last look. I feel like this one, for being kind of colorful, is actually pretty wearable. It's got noticeable blue and purple, but it's kind of subtle because there's so much brown in the look. I actually had some fun doing these looks. I don't know, I haven't been having the most fun with eyeshadow lately for some reason. I guess just because my skin's kind of dry and it's just kind of harder to work with. And the shimmer fallout that I've been dealing with has just been annoying. I kind of had some fun with this, so I'm glad I did it. And then I will share with you the looks that I just took photos of. Here are all the rest of the looks that I did. I have on the left the palette labeled with all of the shades. So for example, this look, I used every shade in the palette, and so there is a label over every shade. Some of these looks I used only a few shades. I know it's kind of hard when I use a lot of shades to tell where they all are. I am sorry for that, and I am going to try to keep things a little more simple going forward. Here's that same palette again with a simpler look. I have the green shimmer on the upper outer lid, that bronzy shade, shade number 2, on the outer lower lash line. Shade 4 is on the center of the lower lash line, and I am using shades 1 and 9 as kind of like the base of the look to even out the skin tone and put a little bit of depth in the crease. Here's another somewhat complicated look. So I started with shade 8 as a crease color, kind of lightly dusted that. It's most visible on the center part of the crease. Then I used shade number 4 to add a little bit of a deeper pink on the inner part of the crease and the outer lower lash line. And then I went in with the deepest matte shade number 3 on the very outer part of the crease. After that, I used shade number 5 on the center of the lid. That one is just like a standard shimmer, no large sparkles. Then on the inner corner, I used shades number 6 and number 2. So 6 is a true glitter, and then I went around the very edges of that shade with shade number 2, which is not very easy to see, but it is there. In this look, I used the deepest shade on the outer lid and inner lid, and then I kind of blended it up into the crease. This shade was kind of frustrating. I did this look on both eyes, one on an unprimed lid and the other, I primed my lid to see how they would apply differently. And this shade is one of those that if you have any kind of oil in your crease or moisture buildup on your eyelids, it will deepen pretty dramatically over those areas. And so I definitely recommend applying this shade over a primer. I didn't have as much of an issue with that with the other mattes in this collection, mainly just this shade specifically. So anyway, I started off with that deepest shade, and after that I went in with the lighter shade, shade number 8, just very lightly around the edges to give it a smoother blend. Then I used shade number 2 just on the center of the lid. I used it first with a dry brush, and then I later went back in with a wet brush to kind of increase the opacity. It's kind of one of those where you see the color of whatever's underneath it. It's not a truly opaque shade, but going in with a wet brush kind of increased the opacity and gave it an even more shiny look. Then I used shade number 9 along most of the lower lash line, but I left the center part kind of open, and then I applied that same shade number 2 on the center of the lower lash line. So that shade's kind of highlighting just the center of my eye. On the inner corner, I'm using shade number 1 is kind of underneath, just evening out the skin tone. And then over top of that, I have shade number 5 to add some shimmer. I started this look out with shade number 4. I first applied it with the brush to the entire lid and blended it up into the crease, and then I packed on another layer with my fingertip, hoping to get those sparkles to kind of stay on the lid. I also used this shade on the lower lash line, and then I used shade number 7 on the upper outer part of the crease to add just a little bit of depth. On the inner corner, I have shade number 9. I applied this one with a wet brush, and then I also used it on the upper part of that winged liner. So what I did was use a liner, like an angled liner brush that was wet with some setting spray, and I applied this as a wing of its own. After that was done, I used shade number 3 in the same way, applying that deep brown with a wet angled brush over top of that shimmer, so that I could have a little bit of that shimmer kind of peeking above the darker wing. With this look, the main thing I was trying to accomplish was to show you what shades like shade number 1 look like on the lid. So this one is one of those creamy powders. It's not a true powder, and I find it looks pretty heavy, and I thought that it would show up a little bit better in a photo like this versus how it showed up in the video earlier. It doesn't come across as much in these photos as it does in real life to me. I just feel like it makes the skin look dry. It kind of catches on any little texture. I mean, I'm kind of nitpicking here, but it's just, I want to show you this because I do prefer the powder mattes in this collection in general, and just in general across eyeshadows, across any brand. I feel like you can kind of see it here. Otherwise, the rest of this look is pretty simple. I used shade number 4 very lightly, dusted in the crease to add just a little bit of depth, and then I used shade number 2 on the lower lash line with a dry brush. And finally, shade number 8 is on the center of the lid, also applied with a dry brush. For this look, I used shade number 1 on the inner corner and brow bone just to even out the skin tone. Then I used shade number 4 as a transition shade. It's kind of very lightly above the crease over the entire eye. And then I have shade number 3 on the outer lid and the inner lid, and it's blended up into the crease, so it's kind of giving a soft halo effect to the eye. And then I have shade number 2 on the very center of the lid, and it's kind of taken up into the crease as well. I have shade number 8 on the inner corner, and I believe I applied this one with a dry brush. On the lower lash line, I just have a brown liner smudged out. That's not one of the shadows in the palette. In this one, I have shade 9 in the crease. Shade number 5 is on the center of the lid. Shade number 8 is on the lower lash line, and shade number 7 is used as a winged liner. And here's that same palette, but I am using shade number 1 in the crease this time, and that's one of those creamy powder shades. It's just barely darker than my skin tone. So I added a little bit of extra depth with shade 9 again on the very outer part. I'm using it lighter in this look. And then all over the lid I have the shade number 2. I applied it with a dry brush and then I added another layer with my fingertip just to get it to show up a little bit more. And finally on the lower lash line I have shade number 3, which was also applied with a dry brush. In this one I have shade 2 applied all over the lid and up into the crease. And then over top of that I layered shade number 3 with a wet brush. This shade had a lot of fallout even when using a wet brush. It was kind of time consuming to clean it up, so definitely be careful with that one. And then I used shade number 1 on the lower lash line applied with a dry brush. From the Peach Power palette, I used the lightest shade in the middle as a crease shade, and then all over the lid I have shade number 3. Both of those were nice quality mattes, good color payoff, easy to blend. With the deeper shade I did apply with a brush first, and then I added another layer with my fingertip to get a nice pop of color, as well as kind of get some of those sparkles to show, but I feel like they aren't really showing up a whole lot. And then I used that self-adhering glitter all along the lower lash line. This was like a combo of 2 palettes that I combined into one look, and I ended up using the bottom palette, Boss Berry. I used that deep berry shade on the outer half of the lid, and then I used the deepest peach shade from the Peach Power palette on the inner half of the lid. Those two blended out fine. I don't think I used the lightest peach as a transition. I think the 2 deep shades blended out just fine by themselves. On the brow bone, I have the shimmer from Boss Berry, kind of lightly. It's not a very opaque shade, but it did work fairly well on the brow bone. On the lower lash line, I have the lightest matte peach shade, and then the 2 shimmers that are most prominent, I have that bluish shimmer from the Boss Berry palette on the inner corner. I applied that one with a wet brush, and then I used the glitter from the Peach palette layered over the mattes on the outer corner, kind of in a winged shape. So here is the neutral brown palette this was one of the minis that I was eyeing as like just potentially buying a single palette or just a few specific palettes from this collection. And so this one, I wasn't sure what the finishes were going to be of the shimmers. And after using it, I can say that I like that this is a little bit of a different version of like a small basic neutral brown palette, but the finishes of the deepest shade and the lightest shade, if you are somebody that likes a very classic kind of simple, straightforward eyeshadow style, um, this is not probably going to be what you're looking for, but it's still a nice option. It's just be aware of what it is. So for this one, I used that medium brown matte shade all over the crease. I applied it pretty heavy-handed, and I kind of packed it on. It's not the most pigment heavy shade, but it does show up well and it blends out well. I used shade number 3 all over the lid. I tapped it on mostly with my fingertip to get this like nice even color payoff. I have used this one with a brush before and I felt like it didn't go on as even as I'd like, and you're going to see that in the next look where I have it applied on the lower lash line. It kind of goes on a little bit patchy with a brush. And then I used shade number 1 with a wet brush, also packed on pretty heavy on the inner corner. Here is another look with that same palette. This time I used shade 2 all over the lid and the crease. I didn't apply it as heavily here. Over top of that, I layered shade number 1 with my fingertip. I did not use a brush to apply it. This shade is a lot like the e.l.f. Fine as Fleck eyeshadows. It's a lot of just glittery sparkle and pretty little, like a very, very small amount of base color. It's very sheer. Um, so that's why in the previous look I packed it on pretty heavy with a wet brush to get it like to really pop. And then here's that shade number 3 on the lower lash line. It does look slightly patchy here. I feel like the more heavy I apply this shade, the more even it looks. It looks better. It's not one that I feel like I can use sheer and have it look good. Here I'm using the Ethereal Lilac palette. I'm using shades 2 and 3. And before I applied those, I used some creamy neutral brown shades for me. I'm using the About Face Matte Fluid Eye Paint in Smell Before Rain. And then I also used a couple of the Velvet Pomades from the Danessa Myricks Groundwork Defining Neutrals, just kind of as a sheer brownish base color. And I applied shade number 3 over top of that on the upper lid. And shade number 2 is applied to the lower lash line with really no base under it. That's, if you see any base color in that shade, it is coming from the eyeshadow itself. Okay, and here's that same palette, and the only thing I'm using from this palette in this look is the glitter shade number 1 on the inner corner. Everything else is just like random stuff I pulled out of my collection, and it's not really related. So that glitter is a flakier, chunkier one. I used it earlier on in this video, and I just wanted to show it a little bit closer here. Here is the Grunge Green palette, and I'm using shade 2 all over the lid and in the crease, and I'm using shade 3 as a blending shade around the edges and along the lower lash line. Shade number 1 is a pressed glitter, and I'm using that over the matte brown on the outer part of the lower lash line. For this last look, I used the matte brown in the crease, the bluish black on the outer lid, and the pinky white shimmer on the lower lash line. All right, that does it for all of the looks. Thank you guys so much for hanging in there. I know that was an excessively long video. I will try to keep things more concise in the future. But anyway, thank you guys. I will see you in the next one.